And no hole any deeper than the root system of the tree or shrub or whatever, because it will sink over time.
Is that what happened to the cypress trees down in the river right now, that they planted the new ones? Some of the top of those cypress trees are just burnt, red.
Could be.
And some of them are not. Some of them are wonderful.
And it could be. I haven't been down there to see, so I really won't comment.
The top surface. So
that's usually a sign with the root system, a sign of a problem with the root system. Okay, so you got your hole dug for this plant, whatever it is. The next thing you do is fill that hole with water and see how quickly the water drains out. If the water doesn't drain out within a few hours, that hole is satisfactory for a swimming pool, but not satisfactory for a plant. Remember, a plant's roots have to have oxygen. And if you do anything that deprives the root system of oxygen, the plant will ultimately die. The most common ways that people deprive their plants of oxygen is to put down plastic over the surface of the ground that's supposed to stop weeds, right? It doesn't really do that, but it cuts off oxygen into the ground and it'll kill the plants that are planted through it sooner or later. But the most common thing is with water. And people say, oh, it died of overwatering. No, it didn't die of overwatering. It died of lack of oxygen. If somebody took and stuck your head in a bucket for 10 minutes, did the water kill you? No, the water didn't kill you. The lack of oxygen killed you. And if your soil doesn't drain, if it holds water for a long period of time, bad, bad place for a plant. Again, I tell you these things from personal experience. When we first built this addition to the nursery, we planted 2 huge trees, right behind. Dug nice holes, put them down in, did everything right. They folded up and died. We went back and dug them up, and I mean, we're talking trunks like this because we moved them from the front of the property. Well, it turned out that there were actually some springs at that time on the front of the property, and you could dig a hole and it would hold water for days. Death to the trees. So your hole has to drain. So fill it with water and be sure that it all drains out within a few hours. If it doesn't, what are you going to do? Sometimes you've just got a layer of caliche and you can break through that. You can dig several little piers down through it and the water will drain on out. Sometimes it's simply not going to happen. You've got too much clay, or you made the mistake of trusting your landscaper to bring in a jackhammer and jackhammer out a nice little basin to put a plant in. It's not suitable for planting a plant. If you can't have a hole that drains well, you create a raised bed. Because if you got a hole that doesn't drain, I mean, it's a great place for a water garden, and I'm all in favor of water gardens, but it's death to a tree or a shrub or just about anything else that you put down in there. So make very certain that the soil drains. Then when you start planting, be sure again that you set that plant in, and if in doubt, the top of the plant should be slightly above the grade of the ground, never below. Now, again, looking at trees, and I won't promise you that it doesn't happen around here occasionally. We frequently get trees in that have been buried too deeply in these black plastic nursery containers. Crepe myrtles are probably the worst. And that is because when you buy a nursery or a nursery grown crepe myrtle, it started out in a little 4-inch pot. Then it's moved to a gallon container, then it's moved to a 5-gallon container, then maybe a 15-gallon, then maybe an even bigger container. And typically, in your lower quality places, do they do the right thing? Do they put soil on the bottom of the pot, set the plant in, and then fill in around the sides the way it should be done? No. Most nurseries, most wholesale growers, they pay their labor by the piece. I mean, they found out if they were paying them $10 an hour, they might do, 50 plants an hour. But if they came back and said, okay, we'll pay you 50 cents a plant, all of a sudden they could do 400 plants an hour. They made a lot more money and they were real happy. But if you watch them plant, they take that little plant, they stick it down in the pot, they dump soil around it, and they put it aside. So plants sometimes come to us buried way too deeply in the container. We try to wash that dirt away. We try to expose the root flare. But I will tell you, we're always 100% successful. And despite the fact that although you deny it, some of y'all, I don't like to think of it as buying plants. I like to think of it as rescuing plants from some of the other places that sell plants. We won't mention orange box stores and places like that by name. But anyway, when you get that plant, be sure that you see the root flare and be sure that that root flare stays right at the surface of the ground. You do that, the plants will grow quickly and they will live a long, long time. We've also found in going out and looking trees where the trunk has been buried a while, not long enough to kill the plant, but long enough to affect it, that if you go in and you dig the soil back away down to where you find the root flare, man, those trees all of a sudden take off, or plants, whatever, take off and start growing far, far faster than they ever had. So just exposing the trunk on a plant that's been buried too deeply is one of the greatest things in the world that you can do. The professionals that do it, you know what they use to clear the soil away? It's called an air spade. It's kind of like a sandblaster without any sand in it. They go in and literally, it's just a huge force of air that blows the soil back away from the trunk. It's a wonderful device. I suspect you'll be able to rent them one of these days. Nowadays, most people, the people that have them will be your tree services, and they run off an air compressor just like a jackhammer. It's a neat thing. Anybody know what the air spade was invented for initially? By the military, like many things. To uncover landmines without setting them off. Go out and blow all the dirt away, and you can see the mines without exploding them. But anyway, we have taken that technology and adapted it to the air spade to expose tree down to the root level, and it makes a big, big difference. So, okay, we've dug a square hole. We've got our plant set in at or ready to set in at the appropriate level. The one thing that I recommend with any plant, wherever you get it, from us or from anybody else, you're going to see, a lot of roots. And in a perennial like this, you can probably just dig a hole and stick it in the ground. But in a tree or a shrub, if you want this plant to do the best possible thing long term, you will now take like a sheetrock knife or something like that, and just rip down the side of the root ball. Even better, rip down the other side of the root ball too. But splitting any tendency for girdling roots can long term save the life of a plant. Because everybody knows what it would be like to have a noose around your neck and strangling you. Well, that's how a tree trunk feels a lot of times. You got the tree trunk here, and you've got roots that have started in a pot, and they've grown around and around and around like this. Now what happens? Those roots are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That tree trunk is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon they're going to run into each other. The roots are going to win, and eventually that root system will strangle and kill that tree. Maybe, what's that?
What's the tool?
Oh, just anything you can cut with.
Would it be better to do a plant like that? The same
All
way?
plants will benefit from that, but I really consider it really important with trees and shrubs. I use, like I say, a little short-bladed knife, a real strong knife like they used to cut sheetrock with, and I'll just use that to rip down the side of the root ball. But that can be real important. In the, I hate to say old days because that kind of dates me, but in the early days when I was in the nursery business, we didn't have plastic nursery containers. I worked for a while with Alton Grimm, wonderful gentleman up in Bernie, who, by the way, is still going strong. Those of y'all that know Alton. Ran into him the other day. He was given 6 months to live with cancer 32 years ago. He's headed for Alaska for a summer fishing trip on the 15th of July, so again, never say never. But one of my jobs when I worked with Alton was to go by Sterling Bakery about every 2 weeks. And these big bakeries, they get eggs frozen in cans about, yay size, about a 5-gallon size. And that's what we potted up our shrubs and our trees and things in. Well, to get the plant out of that container to plant it, we use something called a can cutter. And it's a little metal deal, has 2 handles, and it has a flat piece, and it has a blade on it like that. And you would set it on top, you push the handles together, which splits the top of it, and then you push down the side, and it splits the metal. It cuts the metal down, and we would do that on either side of the plant. I thought that what we're doing is making it easy to get the plant out of the container without busting up its root system too much. Years later, after seeing the problems we encounter with girdling roots, that little blade, whether we liked it or not, was sticking about that far into the root ball, and we were effectively cutting all the roots down the side of that can. And let me tell you, those plants grew a whole lot better than what most landscapers plant out of these plastic buckets, because they just pull them out of the bucket and stick it in the ground, and we end up with that problem with girdling roots. And the thicker the root system is to begin with, the more important it is that you cut the root ball up and down the sides.
What about removing some of the excess roots around the container?
I don't necessarily believe in removing roots because the plant has a balance between its top and its root system, and unless you're trying to bonsai something, in which case you do remove roots as well as top, I don't think you really gain anything by doing that. But splitting the sides of the root ball really is important. In the case of some bigger trees, and there's some tree companies that are doing this now, they will take the tree out of the container, they'll literally